While over the past few years, Marvel have overtaken DC in terms of sheer world domination, when both firms first entered the comics sector many decades ago, the dynamic was completely different. Detective Comics published its first issue way back in 1937, giving it a significant head start on Marvel, which began life as Timely Comics 5 years later. The House of M had ground to make up on its rival, and one of the ways it narrowed the gulf was to see what the competition was doing and pretty much do the exact same thing. Marvel is by no means the only comic book publisher guilty of this practice, and obviously when the power balance shifted, DC ripped off Marvel just as hard. An eye for an eye makes the whole world blind, but it also results in some of the best superheroes of all time that were totally stolen. I'm Josh from WhatCulture.com, and these are 10 Marvel characters shamelessly ripped off from DC Comics. Number 10. THANOS is a rip-off of DARKSEID. When DC Comics introduced the cosmic beefcake that is DARKSEID in 1970, Marvel Comics decided they needed a universe-threatening menace too, and THANOS was born 3 years later. THANOS' creator Jim Starlin has addressed the blatant similarities between the two characters over the years, and explained how he never actually set out to emulate DARKSEID. In fact, the Mad Titan was originally inspired by another of DC's new gods, Metron. When Starlin presented his sketches to then Marvel editor Roy Thomas, he was told to return to the drawing board and rip off DARKSEID instead of Metron, a meeting he spoke candidly about in an interview with John B. Cook for Comic Book Artist. Apparently, he was told, if you're going to steal one of the new gods, at least rip off DARKSEID, the really good one. Number 9. HAWKEYE was Marvel's answer to Green Arrow. Most comic book rip-offs aren't quite as blatant as the Thanos DARKSEID case. Often one publisher will put their own spin on an existing creation and change the character just enough to avoid an expensive lawsuit. And that's exactly how HAWKEYE was born. DC Comics introduced its own Master Archer in 1941's No More Fun Comics issue 73, when Oliver Queen made his arrow-slinging debut, while Clint Barton didn't make his first appearance until Tales of Suspense issue 57 in 1964. The similarities between the two characters are undeniable. Both are sharpshooters whose weapon of choice is a bow and arrow, and they're each partial to tech enhancements. The pair also went on to become key members of their publisher's superhero team, the Justice League and the Avengers, respectively. Plus, let's not forget that Green Arrow wasn't exactly earth-shatteringly original to begin with. I mean, he's basically an amalgamation of Robin Hood and DC's own Batman. Number 8. Black Cat is Marvel's Catwoman. It's obvious what Marvel's intention was when it introduced Black Cat to its comic book universe in 1979's Amazing Spider-Man 194. The publisher wanted a younger, more current version of DC's Catwoman, who made her debut almost 4 decades earlier. Both characters boast pretty identical skills, use the same equipment, grappling hooks and retractable claws, and occasionally fight on the same side as the heroes. Black Cat and Catwoman are also known to share the odd kiss with their heroic counterparts, Spider-Man and Batman, and are underpinned by moral shades of grey. Over time, Felicia has acquired new abilities to set her apart, like super strength and bad luck powers, but her origins are rooted in copycat practices. Number 7. Deadpool was blatantly based on Deathstroke. Deadpool was ripped off from Deathstroke so blatantly that it became a running joke in the comics industry. Wade Wilson was created by artist Rob Liefeld 11 years after DC's Terminator made his first appearance in 1980, when the illustrator presented a sketch of the character that looked like it could have essentially been traced from an image of Deathstroke. Fortunately, the scribe felt the similarities between the two were so glaringly obvious that it was worth proceeding for the controversy alone, and naming the character Wade Wilson was the cherry on top. Over time, Deadpool has taken on a life of his own and become a walking, talking satire of the comic book industry, which makes the striking similarities even funnier. Number 6. Quicksilver was a quick fix that gave Marvel its Flash. The only thing surprising about Marvel launching a Flash knockoff is that it took them 24 years to do it. Although DC debuted its first speedster in 1940's Flash Comics number 1, 2.5 decades was more than enough time to come up with a derivative just different enough to avoid a suing. Quicksilver raced onto the scene in X-Men issue 4, rocking all of the same powers as the Scarlet Speedster. The only key difference was how he got them. DC's Flash was struck by lightning, while Pietro Maximoff's speedy abilities are the result of his mutant origin. But while that's a pretty big difference, Marvel's intention was clearly to create a rival character. To drive home the point that Quicksilver is about as unoriginal as they come, there was another non-Marvel character with exactly the same name who debuted in Quality Comics' National Comics issue 5 back in 1940. He later went on to become DC's Max Mercury. Number 5. Vision bears an uncanny resemblance to Red Tornado. Vision was created by a villain to destroy the Avengers in 1968, but 5 years earlier, DC introduced a character called Red Tornado under suspiciously similar circumstances. Red Tornado first appeared in 1963 as an enemy of the Justice Society of America, but one twist later, he was fighting alongside the heroes as a full-time member. Like Vision, he's an android created as a result of a merger between more than one entity, but that's not even the biggest similarity the characters share. Their resemblance from a visual standpoint is uncanny, give or take a different color palette. To be fair, Vision and Red Tornado have different powers and personalities which have developed over the decades, but the design similarities cannot be overlooked. Number 4. Justice League was assembled before the Avengers. DC Comics' precursor National Periodical Publications popularized the concept of superhero team-ups in 1960 when it assembled the Justice League in the pages of The Brave and the Bold, issue 28. The success of the Union forced Marvel to come up with a rival title, with the company's owner Martin Goodman asking then editor Stan Lee to assemble a league of their own. Lee has recounted that he was told, "If the Justice League is selling, why don't we put out a comic book that features a team of superheroes?" Marvel's initial weapon in the battle against the Justice League was the Fantastic Four, but it wasn't until 1963 that the firm took the fight to its rival by forming the Avengers. Number 3. Boomerang is a Captain Boomerang ripoff, for some reason. Exactly why Marvel wanted to rip off one of DC's goofiest characters remains a mystery, but that's exactly what it did in 1966 when it hurled Boomerang at unsuspecting readers. If the name alone didn't give it away, the villain, who made his debut in Tales to Astonish 81, is essentially a reskinned version of Flash villain Captain Boomerang. Both characters are Australian and have a few special skills beyond, well, tossing gimmick boomerangs around basically. Perhaps Marvel's intention was to one-up DC by launching an even goofier boomerang-tossing villain. If that was the intention, then they won hands down by placing a daft boomerang-shaped mask right on his face. Their character has only one gimmick and they absolutely drove it into the ground. Well played, Marvel. Number 2. Gladiator is basically Superman. Gladiator is a superpowered being whose abilities include flight, enhanced strength, super hearing, heat vision, and ice breath. Remind you of anyone? Just in case anyone mistakenly thought this Marvel character wasn't a complete rip-off of Superman, creators Chris Claremont and Dave Cockrum had him hail from an alien planet and gave him the alias of Kalark, a combination of Supes' Earth and Kryptonian names. So, how did Marvel get away with this unabashed act of plagiarism? By claiming Gladiator was a homage, of course. Not to Superman per se, but the 1930 novel Gladiator, which Supes was also partially based on. Number 1. DEADSHOT was clearly the inspiration for BULLSEYE. DC's DEADSHOT and Marvel's BULLSEYE are two sharpshooters from troubled backgrounds who never miss their targets. The only real difference between them is that the former debuted 26 years before the Daredevil villain. When DC pitted their skilled marksman against Batman in 1950, it worked so well that Marvel decided to pose a similar threat to its dark, street-level hero Daredevil in 1976. The two villains share another thing in common. They've both been butchered on the big screen. DEADSHOT by Will Smith and BULLSEYE by Colin Farrell, but it's a Marvel property that can at least claim to have done that first.
Hey look, they made it through to the end of the video!
I'm so proud of them.
Jesus Christ, I wouldn't have.
No.
But thanks anyway. Like, share and subscribe below. And look at the people who made this. Like I made him, my son Ewan. Also, there's some stuff above us, which you might want to check out. Brilliant!